The land lay quiet after years of war. The horns of conquest had faded, and the dust of countless battles had settled into silence. Israel had crossed the Jordan, faced Jericho's towering walls, stood against Ai's ambushes, and shattered the power of kings in the south and north. Now came the season of dividing the inheritance, the promised land of Canaan, among the tribes of Israel. Among the warriors who had lived through every battle, one figure stood taller in memory than most: Caleb, son of Jephunneh. Caleb was not just another leader of Judah. He was the survivor of an earlier generation, a man whose faith had defied the fear of millions. 45 years earlier, he had stood among the 12 spies sent to survey the land. When 10 men trembled at the giants of Canaan, Caleb and Joshua alone had cried, "We are well able to overcome it." Numbers 13:30. The people had not listened. Their fear had doomed them to wander 40 years in the wilderness. But Caleb, then a man of 40, had held on to the promise of God. "The land you have walked on will be yours and your children's forever." Now, decades later, Caleb was no longer a young man. At 85, his beard had turned silver and his body bore the scars of war. Yet his eyes still blazed with the same fiery faith of his youth. When he stood before Joshua in Gilgal, his voice carried the strength of memory and promise. "I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me. Give me this mountain, the land of the Anakim, where giants dwell. For the Lord will drive them out as he said." Joshua 14:11-12. Joshua, smiling at his old friend, granted his request. And so Caleb claimed Hebron, a land once haunted by the shadows of giants, and made it his inheritance. But Caleb's story did not end with Hebron. For this warrior of faith had a daughter, and through her, another chapter of courage and boldness would be written into Israel's story. Her name was Achsah. The scriptures do not tell us much of her appearance, but her actions speak of her spirit. She had grown up watching her father, listening to stories of Egypt, the wilderness, and the great battles of Canaan. She was the daughter of a man who did not fear giants, and that legacy lived in her veins. But Achsah was also a woman of her time. In Israel's tribal culture, marriages were often woven into the fabric of alliances, inheritances, and promises. Fathers arranged unions, and daughters often bore the weight of their family's honor. Yet in Achsah's story, we glimpse a woman who carried not only obedience but also boldness. It began with Caleb's challenge. When Judah pressed into the land to secure its territory, one city still stood in defiance: Debir, also called Kiriath-Sepher, city of the book. It was a fortified place, holding secrets of the Canaanite world, perhaps even libraries or records of their wisdom. Conquering it would not be easy. So Caleb proclaimed, "Whoever attacks Kiriath-Sepher and captures it, to him I will give my daughter Achsah as wife." Joshua 15:16. This was not a careless promise. Caleb knew the worth of his daughter, and he would entrust her only to a man of courage, faith, and strength, the kind of man who could stand beside her in the legacy of giants. The challenge echoed through the camp. Warriors whispered, leaders pondered. To marry into Caleb's house was to gain honor, but to capture Debir was to risk one's life. Then stepped forward a man named Othniel. He was Caleb's younger kinsman, the son of his brother Kenaz. Othniel was younger, but he carried the same warrior's heart. With sword in hand and faith in the God of Israel, he led the assault on Debir. The battle was fierce, but Othniel prevailed. The city fell, and with it, Caleb's challenge was fulfilled. And so Othniel received Achsah as his wife. The marriage was honorable, the union strong. But Achsah was not content to be a silent figure in the background of her father's story. She, too, would shape her future. Her dowry was land in the Negev, a dry, southern region, vast and open but harsh, where water was scarce. For most, such land would have seemed a burden. Without water, fields could not flourish, flocks could not thrive, and families could not prosper. But Achsah saw what was missing and knew whom to ask. She urged Othniel, her new husband, "Ask my father for a field." Yet when the moment came, Achsah herself took the lead. She dismounted from her donkey and came before Caleb. The gesture was deliberate. In ancient culture, dismounting signified humility, respect, and urgency. Caleb looked at his daughter and asked, "What do you wish?" Her answer was bold. "Give me a blessing. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water." Joshua 15:19. This was not a request born of greed but of vision. Achsah understood the land's potential. She wanted not only survival but abundance. She believed her inheritance could be fruitful, but it required water, the lifeblood of the land. Caleb, moved by her boldness, granted more than she asked. He gave her both the upper and lower springs. Thus Achsah secured not only land but the resources to make it thrive. The sound of victory had barely faded from the hills when Caleb, the faithful warrior now turned elder statesman, kept a promise he had made to himself. For years, he had envisioned a worthy husband for his beloved daughter Achsah, one who would not only carry on the family line but also embody the same spirit of courage and devotion to God that had defined his own life. Caleb was not a man to give his daughter lightly. Achsah was precious to him, sharp in mind, discerning in spirit, and steadfast in her faith. She had grown up under the shadow of war and wilderness, yet her eyes gleamed with a fire that matched her father's. Caleb knew only a man of valor, a man who trusted God fully, could be a fit partner for her. So when he had proclaimed, "To the man who attacks and captures Kiriath-Sepher, I will give my daughter Achsah as wife," he was not offering her as a mere prize. He was testing Israel's warriors. He was seeking a son-in-law who was bold, faithful, and willing to risk everything for the inheritance God had promised. The battle for Kiriath-Sepher was fierce, but one warrior stood out: Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's own nephew. Othniel was not only family but also a man of proven courage. With unwavering faith and tactical brilliance, he struck the city and brought it down. Israel cheered, and Caleb's heart swelled with pride. The contest was over. Othniel had won both the city and the hand of Achsah. Yet while the men celebrated, Achsah's heart turned inward. She admired Othniel. He was brave, steadfast, and honorable. But Achsah, unlike many women of her time, had a mind that stretched beyond the immediate victory. She thought not only of her marriage but also of her future household, of the land they would receive, and of what it would take to make it thrive. In Israel, land was the mark of inheritance. To be given land was to be given a future. Caleb gifted Achsah and Othniel the Negev, the southern land. It was expansive and beautiful in its own rugged way, but it was also dry, arid, and without abundant water sources. Achsah knew this well. She had grown up observing her father's wisdom and strategy, and she understood that land without water meant struggle, hardship, and unfulfilled potential. In her heart, a bold thought stirred: should I ask my father for springs of water? This was not a small thought. Women in her time rarely made requests beyond the domestic sphere. But Achsah was Caleb's daughter. She had inherited his courage, his audacity, and his understanding that God's blessings were to be pursued with faith. The day of her marriage came. Achsah, adorned in garments woven with care, walked beside Othniel as the people rejoiced. Yet even amidst the music and laughter, Her mind burned with resolve. She would not allow her inheritance to remain incomplete. She would ask her father. As the marriage procession approached Caleb's dwelling, Achsah made a decisive move. She gently urged Othniel to let her dismount from her donkey. It was a symbolic gesture, a deliberate act of humility and honor before her father. Kneeling at Caleb's presence, she lifted her voice with the same courage that had defined her lineage. "Father, you have given me land in the Negev. Grant me also springs of water." The request was bold. It was unusual. Yet Caleb, looking into the determined eyes of his daughter, felt a surge of admiration. Here was Achsah, his daughter, not only by blood but in spirit. She had learned to recognize the deeper needs of life, to not settle for less than fullness, and to approach boldly with faith. Caleb smiled. Without hesitation, he blessed her. He gave her the upper springs and the lower springs, a gift far beyond what she had asked, ensuring her household would thrive for generations.